I'll start by removing these screws. Now this screw is not the correct screw. It's much longer than the original screw would have been. And I will be checking that to make sure that that's not the cause of our problems. Lift this off. Now I've got to disconnect my flash connection, which is not that screwdriver. It's not that screwdriver. It's that one. Take out that curved rack. Our wire is loose. Okay, and take that detent off for the aperture settings. And I need to look at this case, and I want to see if there's any sign of things causing me trouble. Well, there's certainly marks in that base of the case there. I see if you can see it. You might be able to see it there. There are certainly marks here. Which almost suggests that the shutter hit the ground like that. I'm just checking the movement of the rack in this case. There's something not right there. It's like the curve is off. It doesn't want to flow around that. It's not a smooth movement at all. I don't know whether perhaps the rack is also damaged. It's certainly the plating on the brass case at this point is rubbed, which means that it's been making contact there. There's a hot, obviously, it's obviously rubbing at that point. Try this back on the body. Where are we? And what I'm checking here is to get an idea of how it fits on the shutter case. It's certainly got a fair bit of grip to it, but I wouldn't have said it was didn't have a particularly distorted feel to it. Will it help if I stretch the case out slightly? Well, because it's not symmetrical, we've got quite a pronounced cutout at this point. If I just stretch it out to make it slightly wider to spring it out, I know that most of my bending is going to take place at this point. There's a bit of a mark on the case at that point. There's certainly a mark on the case at this point. What does that correspond with? Anything in particular? No. There's a mark on the case at that point. We'll stretch the case slightly. We'll see if we get an improved result. That's all I did. I just moved that slightly. Reset the flash wire. I've cocked the shutter because it makes it easier to get the curved rack into position. And I'll put the 2 screws back in the case. I'll just put 1 screw in for the moment. I want to check. So I don't believe that screw can have any influence on it. We'll put it back in. I'm just rolling this rack backwards and forwards. And it certainly binds up. It's certainly got a tight spot. Actually, on the Retina IIa, that might not necessarily cause us any serious issue, because that curved rack does the whole job. It's coupled to the shaft from the front of the camera, and as the film advance lever returns to the rest position, the rack is pulled back. On the Retina IIIc, the curved part, the toothed part of the rack is very short, and then there's a plain pusher that goes back into the case. Now, if that plain pusher in a 3C is curved pusher is tight for any reason, that's not drawn back by the film advance, and it only moves back under the influence of the cocking action of the shutter itself. Right, so what I'm going to do now is try another case, and I'll try another case with this curved rack and see if that makes a difference. I'll try another curved rack with this case and see if that makes a difference. And then finally I'll try a new rack and a new case together and see if that makes a difference. So I'm off to find some parts. And I note that I'm not really taking much dirt off this, so this part has been previously cleaned. And it looks to be in quite good order. The rack I'll just clean again, even though this has been cleaned. And I'll apply a bit of molybdenum paste to the rack, the inner surface where it runs against the shutter case, and both top and bottom surfaces there. The toothed surfaces, I don't think there's much cause to do anything to that, but we'll just run some across there for good measure. So first we need to connect the flash sync wire. Check that the shutter's cocked. drop our curved rack into the track. And fit the case onto the shutter. Fit the 2 screws. It doesn't want to lead in. Alignment not good. That's better. And check the action of that rack again. Oh, it's rubbing. It's certainly running up tight. Now it was when that screw was done up. No, that seems fine now. Check that screws are done up. Oh, that's good. That's all as it should be. Now put our detent in for the aperture settings. Now this scale, you can see these detents. They're closer together at the small aperture end, the f16, f11, f8 end. They're further apart at the f2, f2.8 end. That's so you know which way round this thing goes. So to slide that into the case at this end, I should be able to pull it back and spring it into position at the other end. Like that. And that's our detents for our aperture settings. Well, that shutter now is fit to go back into the camera body. Just unscrew the retainer ring. Now on this camera there were no paper shims fitted, which doesn't mean that there were never any paper shims. It just means that there are no paper shims fitted. So we will put the shutter back in with no shims and see how we get on. Very interesting. Hang on. What do we got here? That housing is not identical. We're back where we started. I was concentrating solely on this notch here, which was different in the examples that I had on hand. But you'll see that this housing also has a notch here, and this one does not. So, back to square one. We're wiser because we know that the cause of our problems is almost certainly the outer case. But we haven't solved our problem because the replacement I selected is not a straight swap. So have I got a case like that? I'll be back shortly. Well, I have my outer case here, the original one off the camera, and I'm looking for a replacement that matches it. And these cases are obviously subtly different. Here's another one. Now this one has quite a different cutout in the side here. This one I believe is probably from a camera with a synchro compor shutter, but it's obviously quite different in the shutter release arrangement than this one. So we need a case that matches this profile. This one won't do it. This one looks promising, but unfortunately in this case it's off a Retina IIa, and so the aperture scale for the depth of field only runs up to f3.5. We'll put that to one side because it's certainly a useful one to use to prove whether or not the fault lies in the case or with the curved rack. I'll see if I have any more. Alright, we might be in business. This one is an f2. The case appears to match in terms of the cutout at that point. I'm just checking any other features to make sure there's nothing I've missed. Oh, that looks good. So our original will pop back over there. In fact, because we've got room to get confused here, I'll put a little black spot on the original one. And likewise with our curved rack, so we can work out which parts we were using. So looking at this case, shows no damage. I think we'll try this one on the camera and see what happens. So I'll just pull the flash wire out of the way for the moment. Drop the rack in there and try this on the shutter. And just running that rack backwards and forwards with the tip of my tweezers, there is no sticking point. It doesn't stick, it's not jamming up, which suggests to me that the problem lay in the case and not with the rack. So this case I will clean up and we'll fit this to the shutter. I have another case here. No, that's different again. Alright, so what have I got? Well, there's more variety in these cases than I thought. Oh, that one's not even off a 2A. That one's off 3C. Alright, so we're stuck. This case is the only one I've got like that, and it's because this is a contour rapid shutter and therefore it lacks the MX sync lever, which is where this second notch is for. It's to allow that little green lever that you're familiar seeing to come through. So what can I do with this case? I've just pulled a stray shutter body from my parts here. I'm just checking the fit of this to see if there's an obvious reason why it should be tight. I can see that at this hole, that's where our locator screw fits in, that hole is distorted. I wonder whether the case actually lies flat in this plane, whether it might have some twist or distortion in it. I'll put one screw in and observe. I want to see if the outer case is pulled down flat on the case or whether it's sitting higher at one spot than the other. Looking at the end of the shutter, I'll zoom you in a bit. Looking in at the end of the shutter here, it appears that the case has been pushed back this way, so it's not sitting quite square to the body. You can see that this corner here is, that angle there is not exactly 90 degrees, which I would expect it to be. That suggests that the case is distorted, and it would be pulled in tighter at the top edge. I'm looking at the distance of the visible edge of the case along the top of the shutter here to see if it's noticeably different. If there's anything in it, it's very slight. No, I certainly wouldn't pick that. Alright, well I'm going to pop that rack in place on this body with this case and check the movement of the curved rack. I'll put the screws back in. Alright, with one screw in, I'm checking that the action of that rack. Look, that's noticeably tight at that end of the travel. Let's put the second screw in to get this stable. So our problem really comes down to, I'm fairly confident the problem is distortion in this outer case. There's something wrong with it. But deciding exactly where on the case it's distorted is the problem. So at this end of the travel, it's free. Going in that direction, it's free. Going in this direction, it starts to jam. And it's very tight. So looking in this gap down in here, in this slot I can see the top of the rack, and I'm looking to see if there's any obvious problem there. It's like there's not enough clearance at this point. So, what to do? Well, I think what to do will be to stretch the case wider at that point. And I'll do that by removing the rack, putting the case back on the shutter without the rack, screwing it down, and try levering the case away at that point. See if we can stretch it away. Now do those screws up so that it's retained correctly. If this was left the way it is at the moment, because that rack action is so stiff, the shutter would work. The shutter would work correctly, but the film advance would be stiff in action and especially reluctant to return to the rest position. So this space in here, that is what I believe is too tight. I'm going to get a small drill bit and see if I can determine what space I have at this point and check that we still have exactly the same space available all the way down that track.